Hey you! Is that a rhinoceros horn, or you just have to be to see? I'm so scared I can't even finish my lame joke.
Ultimate Spider-Man is one of my favourite childhood games. It's got an amazing comic book art style that has held up extremely well, and the web swinging is based off of the amazing PS2 games with webs that attach to buildings. The story and the characters that you meet along the way as well are so much fun to interact with. Of course, with the game being over 20 years old now, there is a fair amount of issues running it on modern hardware. Thanks to emulation though, the ability to play every port of the game on PC is now a reality, and with it we can explore each way of playing on PC to find out which version will be best for you to go with. We are going to cover the PC, Xbox, PS2 and GameCube version, and then at the end, give pros and cons to each version to help you choose which one is going to be the best one to play for your situation. Ultimately, the goal here is to go with the most definitive way possible of playing Ultimate Spider-Man. So what versions, mods, settings and emulators do we need to use in order to achieve that? Well, let's find out together as we ask the question, what is the best way to play Ultimate Spider-Man? Before we get into that though, I need to thank the sponsor of this video, Instant Gaming. Instant Gaming is a website that sells digital games with massive discounts across all platforms such as PC, PlayStation, Xbox and Nintendo. What sets Instant Gaming apart is that it's not a marketplace, and therefore games are directly sourced from authorized resellers. This means that you never have to worry about a dodgy game key that doesn't work. If you're a Spider-Man fan like myself, then you'll be happy to hear that Instant Gaming has Marvel's Spider-Man 2 for an incredibly lower price than on Steam. Before applying tax, the price of the game is £36.77 in my region. Besides brand new games though, I use this site a lot for retro games as well, as it's basically an all year round Steam sale. Like all of the Resident Evil titles have prices as low as under £3. Same with Fallout, Assassin's Creed and Final Fantasy. If you're interested, then use the link in the description or the pinned comment in order to support the channel while saving your money on great games. Now back to the video. We start our journey with a PS2 port running on the PCSX2 emulator. I actually tried this version for the first time on stream with you guys, and you all gave your input on getting this version looking its best. I multi-stream on YouTube and Twitch, so if you want to catch the stream, turn on notifications here on YouTube, or go follow me over on Twitch using the link in the description. Firstly, the only patch for this game within the PCSX2 settings was a 60 FPS one. This meant at first I was running the game at the original 4:3 ratio to get a feel for the version. Another thing I instantly noticed about this version was that certain UI elements like the QuickTime event bar and the arrow that directs you to the objective have a weird, jaggy, crimpled look to them, which instantly made me wonder if that was how they were supposed to look, but no, they're supposed to be clean lines like this. Now we obviously want to play this in widescreen, not 4:3, but since there is no patch, I tried forcing 16:9 in the PCSX2 settings and then restarting the game. This is the emulator equivalent of setting 16:9 within your console settings. Another thing is that the textures on buildings go super low res at a very short distance. I'm pretty sure this is MIP mapping, and it's in the original PS2 version of the game, but on the emulator here you can turn off MIP mapping within the settings, and it does fix the buildings, but just breaks every other textures, so never mind using that. I would recommend you set blending accuracy however to high if your PC can handle it. I ended up at a medium setting as high was giving me some stutters. Besides that, set the internal resolution to whatever your PC can handle as well, and set anisotropic filtering to 16 times. Anisotropic filtering should be set to 16 times on all of the emulator versions, and we'll also get into later how to set it up on the PC version because it lacks it as well. The reason it's somewhat important is because, as you can see on screen here, the difference between having it off and on makes textures a lot more clearer the further away they get. Now there's nothing additional we can do to this version. There's no texture packs or mods or anything, but it's not really necessary. This comic book art style, like I mentioned, holds up really well at their base texture quality. Due to this though, this version is very plug and play, which is going to be a common theme with the emulator versions of the game. Now I've been making this a common practice with playing retro games, but 9 times out of 10 I install ReShade to them in order to bring back stuff like anti-aliasing. A lot of these older games have extremely jaggy edges, so using something like SMA-A on ReShade works so well, and is extremely easy to set up for me personally. over doing it through the Nvidia or AMD control panel. Every version going forward, if you use ReShade, my recommendation would be to do the less is more approach. Increase the vibrancy by a bit to make Spidey pop a little bit more like he does in the comics, and sharpen can bring the textures more to life. Also, anti-aliasing, like I mentioned, is a great option to remove any jaggies that you might have. I also ran a few benchmarks with the different rendering APIs. The thing is, Vulkan is considered the best performance-wise, but OpenGL is more accurate. Sometimes effects and stuff that are on the original PS2 version will be missing if you play it on Vulkan compared to OpenGL. If we pull up the performance graphs here, we can see that the FPS averages at that 60 FPS cap, but OpenGL suffers from major drops in the 1% lows. It's ultimately going to perform different on different specs though. My advice would be that if you want total accuracy and do not care about the stutters that you might get, then go with OpenGL, but if you want the smoothest experience, Vulkan is probably going to be your best bet. For me, Vulkan is the perfect choice for most due to its amazing performance and stability, so I often go with that. Now let's move on to the Dolphin emulator running the GameCube version of the game. Now this version doesn't have the awful mip mapping that the PS2 version does, so in my opinion it overall looks better. There is one major downside though. The 60 FPS patch from the wiki did not work at all. I spent a good 3 to 4 hours trying my best and asking for help on my Discord, but unfortunately no luck. I tried the US and Europe version of the game as well as different codes and nothing seemed to work. This means that things like draw distance being better and the mip mapping being fixed is kind of a one step forward, one step back kind of thing, because we're going to have to run this game at 30 FPS. If you right click the game and go to properties, go gecko codes, add a code and enter these details, which will be in the description, you'll get widescreen support. Now the settings I use for this version are going to be on screen here, as well as my PC specs for reference. Again though, you can copy these settings and see what happens, but every PC is different and some settings are just going to work better on different hardware. You might also be wondering why I'm using DirectX 3D 11 instead of Vulkan. This is mainly because it works way better with hybrid Uber shaders, and the reason I want to keep these Uber shaders is because they help a lot with stuttering in a lot of GameCube and Wii games. On screen though is what Dolphin recommends you use based on your rig. So for me, I'm on Windows and have an Nvidia card, so D3D or OpenGL is a good pick for running in hybrid mode. I honestly think in an alternate world where I could have got the 60 FPS patch to work, this would have been a contender for me as one of the best versions. But for now, let's move on to the Xbox version and see how that does. I'm going to be running this on the XEMU emulator, which is notoriously basic and therefore doesn't have much going on for it. I found out from my other videos that to enable widescreen on this emulator, you have to launch without a disc in order to go into the original Xbox settings. There you can enable support for widescreen and higher resolutions, but of course, Ultimate Spider-Man for some reason doesn't have widescreen support. This means that we have to resort to forcing it through the emulator settings and therefore dealing with a stretched image. Before we get into how the version looks and performs though, it's important to remember that XEMU accepts XISO files. So if you have an ordinary ISO ROM that you need to use with the emulator, you're going to have to convert it using this website here. Thankfully it's really easy to do so though, because all you need to do is set it to ISO or folder if you have a folder, select the file and save it into a location that you want. I removed the .iso on the end, but I don't think this is necessary. It just meant that when I converted the game, I had to choose all files when importing to see the file. This emulator has OpenGL or Vulkan. I actually saw better results from OpenGL, so again, I would choose Vulkan first, but then switch to OpenGL if you experience any performance issues. What's quite sad about this version is that it features visuals better than any of the others featured so far, and runs at a native 60 FPS. Here, side by side, you can see that the PS2 version looks pretty bad, the Dolphin version looks a bit better, and then for me the Xbox version is extremely sharp, but obviously looks pretty dumb being this stretched. It does also have a graphical bug specific to the Xbox version where there's a lot of Z fighting on some of the buildings here. I think that if you can put up with the stretched 16:9 resolution, or you want to play on 4:3, then this is a great plug and play version of the game. The emulator being extremely basic in this case is actually a pretty good thing, because you can install the emulator, get your hands on a ROM of the game, and literally get to playing in seconds. The UI is really simple to understand, and all you need to do is go up to settings in the top, turn up your internal resolution if you want to do that, and force 16:9 if you want to do that as well. Now at this point we've gone through every single emulator option, so now I wanted to see what the PC version has to offer. Will it be better? Well, it's complicated. The PC version is a port of the superior Xbox version, and so it features those super crisp graphics, better draw distance, but also the Z-viting bug. This port shows signs of being quite rushed as well. It's riddled with tiny little bugs here and there that hinder the experience quite a bit. It's important to note though that I have the most hours in the PC version of the game in the past as well as on stream recently. All I'm trying to say is that because I have more experience with this version of the game, it might be why I see it as having more bugs than the other versions. Let's first go through the technical tweaks that you're going to need in order to get this version up to scratch. Every link mentioned in this video so far and in future will be in the description, so when I tell you to get something, it's going to be down there. Firstly, get the Widescreen Fix and just drag and drop it into the main directory of the game. After that, open the config ini file within the scripts folder. Fix HUD is going to be set to 1 by default. This makes the HUD perfectly scaled like the GameCube version, but it does also break the map, making it non-existent. The little dots that you need to follow though are still there, so it's still usable. Setting this to 0 though makes the UI stretched but keeps the game in the correct proportion, and it also restores the map's function. This is up to you, but I much prefer having the map and I don't mind the UI being stretched, so I left this at 0. FPS limit is pretty self-explanatory. You can leave this at 60 to encounter little to no FPS related bugs, or turn it off and cap the FPS using a different tool. 60 FPS is my recommendation here though, as anything over that is going to cause issues. There is, for example, a super annoying bug where Venom cannot climb over a ledge when he's running up walls. I actually can't! Now unless you're really unlucky like me, because even at 30 FPS, this bug was still happening for me. I have a feeling this might just be me using Venom completely wrong though, because Stream pointed out that they didn't encounter the bug, and also PC Gaming Wiki says that the bug only shows up at around 80 to 120 FPS. If you want to change the FOV of the game, then you can do it via the last setting on the list, which is FOV factor. This multiplies the default FOV of the game. It's completely personal preference though, so default is fine if you are unsure. If you want to run the game in borderless windowed mode as well, you need to create a file with the following name followed by .ini. You don't need to put anything inside this ini, just the file itself will tell the game to go into windowed mode. When you've done this and booted up the game for the first time, you want to obviously change a few settings. In the audio tab by default, the game is set to surround sound. For me, I'm using standard stereo headphones, so I set this to stereo and it fixed mixing issues with sound being really loud and dialogue being quiet. Obviously, if you got a surround sound setup though, then surround is probably the better option here. In video, you want to set your display resolution to your monitor's resolution, and then have the detailed shadows set to on. The distance clipping fog option should be turned off too. All this does is add fog to your game in order to hide the low draw distance. If you set this all the way to the left, then the fog is going to be really close, and all the way to the right, it's going to be really far away. If you like the look of the fog hiding the draw distance, then feel free to use it, but for me, I like it off. Next, inside the controls tab of the settings, you want to turn both invert camera options to on. Despite what the name suggests, the game by default has inverted camera controls. So by turning it to on, up is going to be up, down is going to be down, left is left, right is right, etc. Of course, if you like inverted camera controls, then leave this off. Does anyone actually still play with inverted camera controls? Like, you are a very small minority. If so, please leave a comment if you do. I also then went to add ReShade to add the effects that I was mentioning earlier, but unfortunately, the game would crash every time I tried to install it. I figured that because the graphics API is DirectX 9, this was probably what was causing issues. So I used DXVK to translate the API to Vulkan. It made ReShade work instantly, so I stuck with that. You might be wondering that there might be other benefits to translating it from DirectX 9 to Vulkan, like maybe improved performance, but in my testing, not really. My advice would just be to stick to the default rendering API and then only switch to Vulkan if you're encountering issues with DirectX 9. All you need to do is download it from the description and then drag and drop D3D9 inside the X32 folder to the games directory. Now, like I mentioned briefly earlier, the PC version lacks anisotropic filtering, so we want to set that to 16 times. There are many ways to do this, and if you've used DXVK to convert to Vulkan, then what you can do is create a folder within the game directory called DXVK.conf. Then just paste this line that will be down in the description and you're all done. Now, I wouldn't recommend getting DXVK just to enable anisotropic filtering, as this can be done super easily on a driver level via your AMD or Nvidia control panel. It's important that you point the control panel to the ultimatespiderman.exe specifically and don't apply anisotropic filtering globally. Even though I'm only showing it for Nvidia, this can be done on AMD via its control panel as well. The PC version of the game also lacks any kind of anti-aliasing. I use Marty's immersive SMA-A effect, which can be enabled when installing ReShade. This cleaned up those jaggy lines really nicely. If you left everything at default whilst installing ReShade, there is still an effect literally called SMA-A that works pretty well. As long as you're using an SMA-A anti-aliasing solution and not FXAA, then you're going to be good. FXAA, in a lot of people's opinions, including mine, look like someone smeared butter all over the screen. Enabling performance mode as well within ReShade can get you back a few frames if needed. Now, with all the technical steps out the way, how does this port actually feel to play? Well, to put it simply, it was in my opinion the most amazing in terms of visuals and smoothness. Every version tested today also crashed a total of 0 times, so I don't think you have to worry about that no matter which port you choose. The PC version took a bit to get set up of course, but once all of it was up and running, it's such a great way to play. I also explored some suit mods with chat on stream and came across the Ultimate Spider-Man suit remaster. This remasters Spidey, Venom and the symbiote suit, and all of these looked incredible. This gave the suit a much needed bump in vibrancy that better represents the actual Ultimate Spider-Man comic book look. I'll have this mod linked in the description. It can be installed using TextMod, which will also be linked right under it. You just need to run TextMod, point it to the game's exe, open all the .tpf mod files and then hit run. There are 2 shiny fix files, only use 2.0. It's important that you put this at the bottom of the load order using the arrow keys, otherwise you're going to get a terrifying textureless Venom like I did at first. I don't think that's how Venom's supposed to look. So we've been through all the versions and now it's time to give a breakdown of the pros and cons to each. Ultimately, PC is a platform where many of you have wildly different configs and setups, so what works for me may not work for you. Therefore, what this is going to do is narrow down your decision by giving you the different reasons why you should play the different versions. First up is the PS2 port of the game running on the PCSX2 emulator. The pros here are the plug and play nature of the version. It's super easy to set up, and ever since 2.0 is released for PCSX2, this has stood as my favourite emulator to work with. There is also a 60fps patch that works very well in my experience. Since it's doing some wizardry to get to 60fps working instead of it being native like the other ports are, you might need to set the overclock rate to 130%, which can cause a lot of issues. So it's not perfect, but I still see it as an overall pro for going with this version. It also has native widescreen support, which is really good. It comes with its issues like weird things going on with the cutscenes, but that is also a thing in every other port I tested. Controller support is excellent here. Obviously keyboard and mouse support is going to be pretty rough here, but if you like playing on a controller, then you're going to have 0 issues. The last pro would be the nostalgic retro feeling of the port. I think a lot of you probably grew up playing this game, so it's worth noting that any downside to graphics may be bad for some, but for others part of its charm. I sound like a bit of a crazy person saying bad graphics is somehow good, but if you want that retro experience, then this might be the best way to play. Cons would be of course that no matter how retro it might be, the graphics are just the worst of the bunch in my opinion. Also, there are a few quirks here like the UI elements that we mentioned earlier, but none of these are absolute deal breakers. The draw distance in my experience was the lowest of all the ports as well. Lastly, the performance, whilst pretty good, is sometimes hit and miss, especially when using the 60fps patch. You can expect some slowdowns here and there, and I think that overall this version will be the most intense performance-wise if you're running on super low hardware, due to the PS2 just being a bit more complicated to emulate. Now for the GameCube version of the game running on the Dolphin emulator, the pros are that it has the best widescreen out of all of the versions. It scales both the game and the UI perfectly. It also has improved visuals like better draw distance over the PS2 version, and the textures on the buildings not having the same mip-mapping issues of the PlayStation 2. Dolphin Emulator is also one of the most developed emulators out there, with really good performance. There are tons of back-end options for different configs, and things like Uber shaders reduce stuttering. The options here are pretty extensive and also allow you to do pretty cool stuff like using output resampling to make a native GameCube resolution look even better by controlling how chunky or smoothed out the pixels are. It lastly has the same pros of the PS2 version like the amazing controller support, and also very quick and easy to set up and play. For cons, the lack of 60 FPS is a huge blow to the emulator. If you manage to get a 60 FPS code to work, please do let me know in the comments. It'll pretty much save the entire port. Of course, if you're okay with 30 FPS, then this can be ignored. Whilst it's cleaner than the PS2, it still lacks the graphical polish of the Xbox and PC version, meaning it's still inferior in this department. Now onto the original Xbox port. It's an amazing port combined with a lackluster emulator, which make for an interesting mixed bag of pros and cons. Firstly, it has superior visuals that are on par with the PC version. Draw distance, texture filtering, and overall fidelity are great besides the Z-viting bug, which is easily overlooked. It also not only runs at 60 FPS natively, but the XEMU for me and a lot of others runs super well on modern systems. XEMU is also the most straightforward and basic emulator out there. It makes it a really weak emulator due to its lack of customizability, widescreen patches, etc, but in terms of getting it up and running, it takes seconds. Again, controller support is S tier, along with all the other emulators mentioned. For cons, no native widescreen or patch is a huge letdown. It means the only way to play in 16:9 is to deal with a stretched image. How basic the emulator whilst a pro also is a con due to the serious lack of customizability in comparison to the others. You do not want to go with this version if you love having full control on how you emulate your games. Last but not least is the PC version. Pros are the visuals, it's on par with the Xbox version it's based off of. The ability to add fixes means widescreen support, whilst not perfect like Dolphin is, are still better than nothing. Someone commented on my Web of Shadows video saying that the ability to download suit mods should be a pro for using the PC version, and I absolutely agree. Being able to add in so many different custom suits adds so much replayability to the title, and like I mentioned, the remastered Ultimate Spider-Man suits are so incredible. Native 60 FPS support feels amazing as well, similar to XEMU. This was one of the best performance-wise for me as well. On my PC, I never went below 60 FPS, besides the mentioned switch to DXVK. Cons would be the time and effort that it would take to get running perfectly. If you want a plug-and-play solution, this is not it. Whilst you can in theory play this without any adjustments at all, you'll get a pretty worse experience than just using an emulator. It also has a few strange bugs. Having to rebind the controller to use bumpers for swinging was a bit weird, and the Venom bug still persisting through locking the game to 30 was super frustrating. You also need to turn off and on the invert camera control options every time you boot the game. Controller support is pretty bad here as well. Depending on what you want to use, I would be prepared to do a little tinkering. Older controllers may prevent you from moving your character diagonally, for example, and PlayStation controllers will need an X input translation layer like DS4 Windows. Overall, to summarize all the ports, in my opinion, the best overall is still the PC version. Despite its complex and long-winded setup, it offers the best visuals, native 60 FPS support, widescreen, and brilliant performance. It does feel weird to crown this as the best version to play, as it does come with its fair share of downsides, but the reason is personal, and it comes down to the fact that it's so sharp and smooth to play. If you want to get the best visuals and performance and are willing to put up with the quirks, then it will be a great experience. If you however hate tweaking with PC games and just want something that's extremely easy to set up, then you can't go wrong with the Xbox or Dolphin version. You have to decide whether you want 60 FPS or true widescreen support. Dolphin will be locked at 30 FPS unless you find a way to get a 60 FPS patch working, and the Xbox version runs natively at 60 FPS, but will have to be played at either 4:3 or stretched 16:9. Now that just leaves us with the PS2 version, and in no way is this a bad version, it's just not as good as the other ones. However, if you want a nostalgic or specifically retro experience, then I would go with this one. It's super easy to set up and has its advantages like 60 FPS as well as widescreen, making it the best of both worlds compared to the Dolphin or XEMU offerings. I grew up with a PS2 console and I love that thing so much, so I have a heavy bias here, but if I wanted to go back and re-experience this game in a more retro, rose-tinted glasses, nostalgic kind of way, then this would be the version that I would go with. It's got that really nice 2000s vibe to it that I love, And also you can play it in software mode or low internal resolution like 720p and put a CRT shader on top of it to get the complete look and have that proper cozy retro experience. Ultimately though, the best way to play Ultimate Spider-Man is a complicated one, but hopefully this guided you through what you need to do to each port in order to get it looking really good, and also help you come to a decision on which one you want to play. I feel we did a pretty good job at bringing this classic back to life through the PC tweaks, and with that mentioned remastered suit mod, this game has never looked better. I had a blast playing this on stream with you all, and I will be streaming more of it after this video goes live, so catch me here or on Twitch if you'd like to come say hi. Huge thanks to the channel members here on YouTube and Patreon. You all keep this channel alive, and you can do the same for just £1 a month. Links will be in the description. Also, if you made it this far, then I want to say thank you by letting you know about a giveaway me and Instant Gaming are running. The link to the giveaway will be down in the description or the pinned comment. The winner gets any game of your choice on the platform. When you go to the link, make sure that you're subscribed to the channel in order to increase your chances of winning. The winner will be drawn every month. Thank you again Instant Gaming for sponsoring this video, and remember to use my link if you want to buy some games, as it helps out a ton. Lastly, if you want to see the other best way to play episode where we did the same for Spider-Man Web of Shadows, then click through to that on the left. Or if you're curious how you can take a capped 30 FPS like the Dolphin port that we explored and double it to 60 using the power of frame generation, then watch the video on the right, which tells you exactly how to do that using a program called lossless scaling. See you over there.